The air in the penthouse of the Gilded Lily was thin, filtered through expensive ventilation and heavy with the scent of Soo-jin's signature sandalwood. To any other employee, this room was the inner sanctum of a god. To Naomi, it was a cage she had walked into willingly, dressed in the armor of a man's tuxedo. As Noah Stewart, she had mastered the art of the invisible servant. She kept her shoulders squared, her voice dropped an octave, and her gaze perpetually fixed on the floor. But as she set the crystal decanter of whiskey onto the mahogany desk, the silence in the room didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, like a predator holding its breath. Soo-jin didn't look at the drink. He didn't even look at the papers in front of him. His dark, piercing eyes were fixed entirely on the man standing before him. He leaned back, his tailored suit jacket straining slightly against his broad frame, his presence radiating an alpha stillness that made Naomi's skin prickle. "Is there
Is there
something
something
else,
else,
Mr.
Mr.
Stewart?"
Stewart? No,
Soo-jin
sir.
asked. His voice was a low, melodic rasp that seemed to vibrate in Naomi's very bones. "No, sir," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite the frantic drumming of her heart. She turned to leave, but Soo-jin's next words stopped her dead in her tracks. "The scent of jasmine is quite strong tonight," he mused, his eyes tracing the line of her neck where her disguise met her skin. An unusual choice for a man who claims to live in a tenement. The hunt had begun. Naomi didn't know it yet, but the man behind her didn't just want a drink. He had decided he wanted her, and he was prepared to watch her every move until she had nowhere left to hide. The silver tray felt like a lead weight in Naomi's hands. As she adjusted the stiff, high collar of her tuxedo, she took a steadying breath, grounding herself in the persona of Noah Stewart. For 3 months, this suit had been her armor, a charcoal gray lie that kept her off the freezing New York streets and away from the hunger that had once clawed at her ribs. She stood outside the double mahogany doors of the penthouse suite. Inside was the man who signed her paychecks, and the man the entire underworld spoke of in hushed, terrified tones: Soo-jin. The doors opened with a silent, heavy glide. The room smelled of expensive sandalwood and the cold, metallic tang of absolute power. Soo-jin sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of obsidian, his silhouette framed by the sprawling, glittering lights of Manhattan. He didn't look up as she entered. Naomi's pulse hammered against her neck, hidden by the silk tie. She moved with practiced, masculine efficiency, setting the crystal decanter of whiskey on the desk. She made sure not to let the glass clink. She made sure to keep her gaze cast down, as a lowly waiter should. "Your drink,
Your
sir,"
drink, sir.
she murmured, dropping her voice to that forced, gravelly register she had perfected with William's help. She turned to leave, her heart finally slowing as she reached for the handle. "Wait." The word wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a physical blow. Naomi froze. Slowly she turned back. Soo-jin was leaning back now, his dark, feline eyes tracking the movement of her throat. He wasn't looking at his drink. He was looking at her. No, he was looking into her. "You have very delicate
You have
wrists,
very
Noah,"
delicate
he said
wrists.
softly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Naomi didn't blink, though her lungs burned for air. In that single moment, the foundation of her 3-month deception began to hairline fracture under the pressure of his predatory gaze. Naomi's mind raced through 1,000 excuses, but her tongue felt like lead. I've been told that before, sir," she managed to say, forcing a stiff, awkward shrug. "Doesn't help much with carrying heavy crates in the cellar." Soo-jin didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He simply rose from his chair, his movements fluid and dangerously graceful. He walked around the desk, stopping just inches from her. He was a head taller, an alpha presence that seemed to warp the very air around them. Naomi felt the heat radiating from him, a magnetic pull that made her want to both run and lean in. "A man of many secrets," Soo-jin mused, his voice a low vibration that Naomi felt in her marrow. He reached out, his long fingers hovering just an inch from the lapel of her jacket. He didn't touch her, but the intent was there, a silent claim. I find that I am very fond of secrets, Noah, especially the ones that think they are well hidden. I'm just a waiter, sir, she whispered, her Noah voice cracking just slightly. Are you? He tilted his head, his dark eyes searching hers with an intensity that felt like a caress. We shall see. He dismissed her with a flick of his hand, but as Naomi escaped into the hallway, she felt a cold shiver go down her spine. The hunt hadn't just begun. She had already been caught. She just didn't know the cage was already closing. The next week was a blur of paranoia. Everywhere Naomi turned, she felt the phantom weight of Sujin's attention. When she worked the floor of the Gilded Lily, she would catch him watching her from the VIP mezzanine, his face a mask of calm obsession. She began to take different routes home. She changed her hair under her cap, wrapped her chest tighter, and barely spoke to William. You're jumping at shadows, Nay, William told her one morning over a shared bowl of cereal in their cramped kitchen. You've been Noah for months. Why would he care now? Because he isn't looking for a waiter, Will, Naomi said, her hands trembling. He's looking for a lie, and he found one. That night, standing on the subway platform at 3:00 a.m., the station was empty, or so she thought. As the train roared into the station, the wind whipping her hair, she saw a reflection in the darkened window of a vending machine. A tall figure in a tailored black overcoat stood 10 feet behind her. He wasn't boarding, he wasn't moving, he was just watching her. When she turned around, the space was empty. The platform was a ghost town, but the scent of sandalwood lingered in the stale, underground air. He was following her. He was learning her rhythms, her fears, and her life. The following shift, Naomi found a small, unmarked box in her staff locker. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. Inside sat a small glass vial of jasmine oil, the exact scent she used to wear before she became Noah. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a message. I know who you are. I know what you hide. And I like the scent of your truth. She wanted to throw it away, but her hand gripped the glass tightly. The obsession was starting to feel like a cord tied around her waist, pulling her back toward the upstairs office. She spent the entire night in a state of hyper-awareness, waiting for the summons. It never came. Sujin was playing a longer game. He was letting her sit in the fear, letting the realization sink in that she was no longer an employee. She was a prize. As she clocked out, the floor manager handed her an envelope. The
The
boss wants you to
boss
take the
wants you to
service
take the
car
service
tonight,
car
Noah.
tonight,
Says it's a
Noah.
reward for your unique service. Naomi looked out the window. A black sedan with tinted windows sat idling at the curb. She didn't take the car. She ran. The stairs to her apartment felt steeper than usual. Naomi was out of breath by the time she reached the 4th floor, her keys jangling in her shaking hand. She just wanted to lock the door, peel off the suit, and disappear into her blankets. She burst through the door, calling out, "Will, you won't believe the night I—" She stopped. The words died in her throat. William was standing by the kitchenette, looking utterly bewildered and terrified. But he wasn't alone. Sitting on their sagging second-hand sofa, a piece of furniture that looked like a joke underneath him, was Sujin. He looked perfectly at home in their crumbling apartment, his legs crossed, a cup of tea in his hand. He looked up as Naomi entered, his eyes dark and shimmering with a terrifying sort of triumph. "You're late,
You are
Noah," he
late,
said
Noah.
softly, his gaze dropping to her trembling hands. "I was just telling your friend here how much I value your dedication to the club." He stood up slowly, the small room suddenly feeling like it was shrinking around them. He walked toward her, stopping until he was close enough that she could smell the whiskey and the sandalwood on his breath. "But I think we're done with the costumes, don't you, Naomi?" The name hit her like a physical blow. The secret was dead. And as Sujin reached out to finally, slowly, tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, Naomi realized that being homeless might have been safer than being found by a man like him. The silence in the cramped apartment was deafening. William stood frozen by the sink, his knuckles white as he gripped a dish towel, his eyes darting between Naomi and the Titan standing in their living room. Soo-jin didn't spare William a second glance. His entire universe had narrowed down to the woman in front of him. He reached out, his thumb grazing the sharp line of Naomi's jaw, a touch so light it was almost a question, yet so firm it felt like a command. "William," Soo-jin said, his voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "I believe you have an errand to run. Take my car. My driver has a list of groceries and amenities that this household seems to be lacking." "I'm not leaving her," William stammered, his voice thin. Naomi looked at William, seeing the genuine fear in his eyes. She knew Soo-jin didn't need to raise a hand to be devastating. His bank account and his influence could erase a man like William from the city records by morning. "It's okay, Will," Naomi whispered, her heart hammering against the chest binder that suddenly felt like it was suffocating her. "Go, I'll be fine." The door clicked shut behind William, leaving Naomi alone with the man who had haunted her shifts and shadowed her commute. Soo-jin didn't move away. Instead, he stepped closer, forcing Naomi back against the peeling wallpaper of the hallway. "You're trembling, Naomi," he murmured. He used her real name like a prayer and a threat. "Is it the cold, or is it me?" "You're trespassing," she spat, her bravado a thin veil over her rising panic. "And I'm still Noah until I clock out." Soo-jin's hand moved from her jaw to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in the short-cropped hair of her wig. He tilted her head back, forcing her to meet his dark, obsessive gaze. "Noah is a ghost," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "And I don't care for ghosts. I want the woman who had the audacity to lie to my face for 90 days. I want the woman who thinks she can hide from me in a city I own." He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "You aren't going back to the club as a waiter, Naomi. You're going back as mine." Naomi shoved against his chest, her palms landing on the fine wool of his blazer. He didn't budge. He felt like a marble statue, unyielding and cold, yet radiating a heat that made her lightheaded. "I'm not a piece of property, Soo-jin," she hissed. "I took that job to survive, not to be recruited into your collection." Soo-jin let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through her palms. He caught her wrists, holding them together in one of his large hands. He didn't squeeze, but the strength was unmistakable. He was an alpha who didn't need to bark to show his teeth. "You think this is about recruitment?" He stepped even closer, his body pinning hers gently but firmly against the wall. "I have spent 3 months watching you. I know you take your coffee black. I know you walk 3 extra blocks to avoid the broken streetlight on 4th. I know you give half your shift meal to the stray cat by the service entrance." Naomi's breath hitched. The level of his surveillance was chilling. He hadn't just discovered her secret, he had mapped her soul. "That's stalking," she breathed. "That's devotion," he corrected, his eyes dropping to her lips. "The world is a predatory place, Naomi. A woman as beautiful and desperate as you doesn't last long without a shadow. I've decided to be yours." He released her wrists and reached for the buttons of her tuxedo jacket. Naomi froze, her hands flying up to stop him. "Don't," she barked. Soo-jin paused, his eyes narrowing with a flash of something possessive. "I am merely helping you out of this lie. You shouldn't have to bind your breath just to eat. From now on, you will breathe only for me." He stepped back, giving her space, but the air he left behind felt empty. He walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. He ruled. "Tomorrow, a stylist will arrive. You will dress like the queen you are, or you will stay in this room until you forget what the sun looks like. The choice, as always, is yours." The next morning, Naomi woke up to the sound of rustling silk. She sat up in her small bed, expecting to see William, but instead, she found 2 women in professional gray suits silently hanging dresses in her cramped closet. They moved with a clinical efficiency that screamed Soo-jin. On her nightstand sat a single black card with embossed gold lettering, the Gilded Lily. 9:00 p.m., floor seat, no suit. She wanted to tear the dresses apart. She wanted to run to the bus station and disappear into the Midwest. But when she looked at her phone, there was a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of William, sitting in a high-end cafe, eating a breakfast that cost more than their monthly rent, looking safe and blissfully unaware. It was a golden cage. Soo-jin wasn't using a whip, he was using comfort as a weapon. Naomi spent the day in a state of quiet fury. She refused to wear the most extravagant gown, choosing instead a sleek, high-necked black dress that felt like a compromise between her dignity and his demands. When she arrived at the club, she didn't use the staff entrance. The doorman, who had shared cigarettes with Noah just 48 hours ago, bowed deeply as she passed. The irony tasted like ash in her mouth. She was led to a private table on the edge of the dance floor, the best seat in the house. A bottle of the same whiskey she used to serve Soo-jin sat in a silver bucket. 10 minutes later, the room went silent. The heavy, rhythmic thud of the bass seemed to sync with the footsteps of the man approaching her table. Soo-jin appeared out of the shadows, looking immaculate in a midnight blue suit. He didn't sit. He stood over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You
You
look
look stunning,
stunning,
Naomi.
Naomi," he said, his voice carrying over the music. "But you're missing something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a delicate gold anklet. Before she could protest, he dropped to one knee, not in a gesture of proposal but of marking. He fastened the gold around her ankle, his fingers lingering on her skin. "Now," he whispered, looking up at her with eyes that promised she would never be lost again, "everyone knows who you belong to." Naomi pulled her leg back, the gold chain catching the light. "I don't belong to anyone. I'm here because you're holding my roommate's future over my head." Soo-jin stood, unbothered by her defiance. If anything, her fire seemed to feed his obsession. He offered his hand. "Dance with me." "I don't dance." "You did quite well when you were Noah, weaving through the crowds with trays of gin," he teased, his thumb tracing the palm of his own hand. "Dance with me, or I'll have the DJ stop the music and we can discuss your resignation in front of the entire room." It wasn't a request. Naomi stood, her heels clicking against the polished floor. As they moved to the center of the room, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Other powerful men, men who usually commanded the room, lowered their heads as Soo-jin passed. He pulled her close, his hand splaying across the small of her back. The contact was electric. Naomi tried to maintain a distance, but Soo-jin's arm was like a band of iron, tucking her firmly against his chest. "You're stiff," he murmured, his nose brushing against her temple. "Relax, Naomi,
Relax,
I'm
Naomi.
not
I'm
going
not
to
going to
hurt
hurt you.
you." "Your presence is a hurt," she countered, though her heart was betraying her, racing at the scent of him. "Is it?" He spun her slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Or is it the first time in your life someone has looked at you and actually seen you? I saw you when you were wearing that ridiculous wig. I saw the way you handled the drunks. I saw the fire in your eyes when you thought no one was looking." He pulled her back in, his grip tightening. "I didn't fall for a waiter, Naomi. I fell for a survivor, and I am the best thing you can survive with." The song slowed, the lights dimming to a deep, bruised purple. Soo-jin leaned down, his lips ghosting over her earlobe. "Tonight, you stay at the penthouse, not as a worker, as my guest. And if I say no, then I suppose I'll have to spend the night parked outside your apartment again," he said simply. "And I don't think your neighbors would appreciate the sirens my security detail tends to attract." The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, save for the hum of the machinery. Naomi stood in the corner, her arms crossed, watching the floor numbers climb. She felt like she was ascending to a high-altitude prison. When the doors opened, the penthouse was different than it had been when she was Noah. The harsh office lights were off, replaced by the warm, amber glow of floor lamps. "There is a room
There is
prepared
a
for
room
you,"
prepared for
Soo-jin
you.
said, gesturing toward a hallway lined with art. "It has everything you need. No suits, no lies. Naomi walked toward the room but paused at the door. She turned to look at him. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. He looked lonely, in a way only a man with everything can be. Why me, Sujin? You could have anyone. Women who actually want to be here. Sujin turned, his expression unreadable, because they want the Mafia boss. They want the money and the fear I inspire. You, he walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. You looked at me with those defiant eyes while serving me a drink, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like a man instead of a monument. He stopped just outside her bedroom door. He didn't try to enter. He respected the threshold, a surprising show of restraint from a man who usually took what he wanted. Sleep, Naomi, he said softly. Tomorrow we begin your new life, and don't bother locking the door. I don't need a key to get to you. I'm already under your skin. He was right. As Naomi closed the door and leaned against it, her heart wouldn't stop its frantic, traitorous rhythm. She was a captive, yes, but she had never felt more alive. The sunlight that streamed into the penthouse was too bright, too clinical, and far too expensive. Naomi woke up in a bed that felt like a cloud, wrapped in silk sheets that cost more than her father's old truck. For a moment, she forgot. Then, the weight of the gold anklet against her skin reminded her. She wasn't a waiter anymore. She was a guest who wasn't allowed to leave. She found Sujin in the dining room, dressed in a charcoal vest, reading a digital tablet while a chef silently placed a plate of smoked salmon and poached eggs in front of him. He looked up, his eyes dark and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with breakfast. You slept late, he noted, his voice a low purr. The city suits you, Naomi, even when you're hiding from it. I want to go home,
I want to
Sujin,
go home,
she said,
Sujin.
ignoring the chair he pulled out for her. I have a life. I have a roommate who probably thinks I've been sold into a trafficking ring. Sujin took a slow sip of black coffee. Bwwm is currently at a job interview for a high-end architectural firm, a position he was randomly scouted for this morning. If he gets it, he'll never have to worry about rent again. If you leave, well, I imagine the firm might find his resume less impressive. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. It was a perfect, bloodless strike. He wasn't hurting her friend. He was blessing him, but that blessing was tied to her neck like a noose. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm an investor, he corrected, standing up and walking toward her. He stopped just inches away, his alpha heat radiating through his clothes. And I've invested everything in you. Don't make me pull my funding, Naomi. It would be a tragedy for everyone involved. He reached out, his fingers tracing the collarbone she used to hide under a stiff cotton shirt. Now eat. We have a gala to attend tonight, and this time you won't be carrying the tray. The gala was a sea of New York's elite, corrupt politicians, socialites, and the shadowed men who ran the docks. Naomi felt exposed in her emerald green gown, the slit up the side showing just enough of the gold anklet to mark her as Sujin's. Sujin kept his hand firmly on the small of her back, a possessive anchor in the crowded room. Every man they passed bowed their head to him, but their eyes lingered on Naomi. They were looking for Noah, the boy who used to bring them scotch. Smile, Naomi, Sujin murmured into her ear, his breath tickling her skin. They're wondering how a common waiter caught the eye of the dragon. Let them wonder, she snapped, though she didn't pull away. Suddenly a man approached, a rival boss named Morty known for his crude temper. He squinted at Naomi, his eyes widening. Wait a
Wait a
minute.
minute, I know
I
this
know those
face. You are the
eyes.
kid from
You're
the
that
Lily,
kid from the
the
Lily.
one who spilled
The
gin
one
on
who
my shoe
spilled
last month.
gin on my shoes last month. The air in the circle went frigid. Sujin's grip on Naomi tightened, his posture shifting into something predatory. You must be mistaken, Morty, Sujin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. This is Naomi. She is my personal guest. To suggest she was a servant is to suggest my taste is common. Are you suggesting my taste is common? Morty blanched, the color draining from his face as he realized he had stepped into a trap. No, Soo-jin, of course not, my mistake. Beautiful woman, truly. As Morty scurried away, Naomi looked at Soo-jin. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at her, his expression one of fierce, terrifying protection. You protected me, she whispered. I protect what is mine, he replied, his thumb stroking her waist, even from their memories. They returned to the penthouse as a thunderstorm broke over the city. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a private, blurred world for the two of them. Naomi was packing the living room, the adrenaline of the gala still singing in her veins. You can't keep doing that, rebranding my life, erasing who I was. Soo-jin shed his jacket, tossing it onto a chair. He walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. Who were
Who
you,
were you,
Naomi?
Naomi? A woman living in fear, starving in a suit that
A
doesn't
woman
fit. I am not
starving in a
erasing you,
suit
I am
that doesn't
unearthing you.
fit. I'm not erasing you. I'm unearthing you. He caught her waist, pulling her flush against him. The friction of her silk dress against his shirt sent a jolt of pure electricity through her. Naomi gasped, her hands instinctively going to his shoulders to push him away, but her fingers curled into his shirt instead. I hate you, she breathed, though her body was leaning into his. Liars should be punished, he whispered, his lips hovering just above hers. He kissed her then, not a gentle ask but a deep, possessive claim. It tasted of whiskey and obsession. Naomi fought it for a heartbeat, her mind screaming to run, but her heart had already surrendered. She kissed him back, her hunger matching his own. He lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her toward the bedroom. The storm raged outside, but inside, the only sound was the frantic beat of two hearts that had been hunting each other for months. In the shadows of the silk sheets, the alpha and the survivor finally collided, the lines between captor and captive blurring into a heat that neither of them could escape. Naomi woke up to the feeling of a heavy arm draped across her waist. The room was dark, save for the city lights reflecting off the wet glass. Soo-jin was asleep, or so she thought. If you're thinking of running, he murmured, his voice thick with sleep but laced with that same unshakable authority, the door is biometric. It only opens for me. Naomi sighed, turning in his arms to face him. His hair was mussed, his sharp features softened by the night, but his eyes were wide open, watching her with a terrifying intensity. Is this it then? She asked. I'm just another trophy in your penthouse. You are the only thing in this room that isn't a trophy, he said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. Trophies are dead things. You are the fire that keeps me warm. I won't let you go back to the cold, Naomi. Not ever. You can't buy love, Soo-jin. I don't want to buy it, he whispered, pulling her closer until her head rested on his chest. I want to surround you with so much of myself that you forget there was ever a world without me. It was the most romantic thing she had ever heard, and the most frightening. The following week, Soo-jin allowed Naomi more freedom. She was allowed to go to the park, to visit the library, even to meet Bwwm for lunch, but she was never alone. Everywhere she went, a black sedan sat a block away. Every time she turned a corner, a man in a sharp suit was walking 20 paces behind her. He's obsessed, Nay, Bwwm whispered over coffee. He looked better, fed, well-dressed, his eyes bright with his new career. But he's taking care of us. I've never seen a man look at someone the way he looks at you when he thinks you aren't watching. He's a stalker, Naomi reminded him, though the word felt less sharp than it used to. Maybe, Bwwm mused, but in this city, I'd rather have a lion watching my back than a pack of wolves at my throat. As Naomi walked back to the penthouse, she deliberately slowed down. She stepped into an alleyway, waiting. 5 seconds later, the man following her turned the corner, his hand going to his earpiece. She's in the alley, the guard whispered. Naomi stepped out from behind a dumpster. Tell him if he wants to know where I am, he can ask me himself. The guard looked stunned. Naomi didn't wait for a response. She kept walking. She didn't head for the penthouse. She headed for the Gilded Lily. It was time to show Sujin that even if he owned the cage, she still knew how to pick the lock. The velvet ropes of the Gilded Lily parted before Naomi as if she were royalty. The staff, her former peers, averted their eyes, some out of respect, others out of a lingering, confused fear. She didn't head for the VIP booths or the bar. She went straight for the private elevator, the one that required a gold-plated keycard. The doors opened to the penthouse office, and there he was. Sujin was standing by the window, a phone pressed to his ear. He froze when he saw her, his expression shifting from cold calculation to a dark, simmering heat. He hung up without a word. "You sent my guard on a fool's errand," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, melodic rasp. "I'm not a
I'm not a
package to be
package to be
tracked,
tracked,
Sujin,"
Sujin.
Naomi said, walking right into his personal space. She didn't stop until her chest was inches from his. "If you want to know where I am, call me. If you want to see me, come home. But stop treating me like a ghost in my own life." Sujin's hand shot out, his fingers threading through her hair, tilting her head back. "I treat you like a heart, Naomi. I keep you close because if you stop beating, so do I." The intensity in his eyes was staggering. It wasn't just desire. It was a soul-deep hunger that she finally realized she couldn't fight. Not because he was stronger, but because she had started to crave the weight of his shadow. A week later, a ghost from Naomi's past appeared. It wasn't a person, but a debt, the one that had started her descent into Noah. A predatory lending firm that had hounded her family for years had been quietly liquidated overnight. She sat in Sujin's library, the legal papers in her hand. "You bought my
You
family's
bought
debt."
my family debt.
Sujin didn't look up from his glass of scotch. "I didn't buy it. I erased it. You shouldn't have to carry the weight of dead men's mistakes, Naomi." "Now I just owe a different man," she countered, her voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and fury. He set the glass down and walked toward her, his silhouette blocking out the light. "You owe me nothing but your presence. I told you before, I am an investor, and I don't invest in things I intend to lose." He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "You are free, Naomi, truly free. You can walk out that door right now and the debt stays dead. William keeps his job, your family stays safe." Naomi looked at the door. It was unlocked. For the first time, the biometric lock was off. The cage was open. She looked back at Sujin, whose expression was a mask of agonizing restraint. He was giving her the choice he had denied her for months. She didn't move toward the door. She moved toward him. That night, the power dynamic shifted. Naomi was no longer the girl in the oversized suit, and Sujin was no longer just the boss upstairs. In the quiet of the master suite, she initiated the touch. She reached up, undoing the silk tie that symbolized his authority. "You spend so much time watching me," she whispered, her hands sliding under his vest. "Tonight, look at what you've actually won." The air in the room became electric. Sujin's composure broke, his hands gripping her waist with a desperate, raw need. There was no stalking here, no games, only the collision of two people who had found their match in the dark. He worshipped her skin with the same intensity he used to rule the city, his movements a blend of alpha dominance and a surprising, shattering tenderness. Naomi met him beat for beat, her defiance turning into a fire that burned away the last of the Noah persona. In the heat of their embrace, she realized that she wasn't losing herself to him. She was finally being seen. Even in a world of no violence, the Mafia had its tensions. A rival faction had begun to circle Sujin's territory, not with guns but with buyouts and betrayals. Sujin became a ghost in the penthouse, his face lined with the stress of a silent war. Naomi watched him from the shadows of the hallway. She realized she knew his rhythms now, the way his jaw tightened when a deal went south, the way he breathed when he thought he was alone. One evening, she walked into his office and set a glass of water on his desk. He looked up, startled. You used to bring me whiskey, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Whiskey is for the boss, she said, leaning over the desk. Water is for the man who needs to stay sharp so he can come back to bed. Sujin pulled her onto his lap, his head resting against her shoulder. They think I've grown soft because of you. Are you? No, he whispered, his grip tightening. I've grown dangerous. Before I had nothing to lose. Now I have everything. It had been 6 months since the night Naomi first walked into the penthouse as a waiter. To celebrate, Sujin did something she never expected. He took her back to the little apartment she had shared with William. It was empty now, cleaned and quiet. Why are we here? She asked, looking at the spot where she used to hide her binder in the floorboards. Because I want you to remember, Sujin said, standing in the middle of the room. I want you to remember the woman who was brave enough to dress as a man to save her life. Never lose that woman, Naomi, even when you're wearing my diamonds. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't an anklet this time. It was a ring, simple and elegant, featuring a dark, radiant sapphire. I won't
I
ask you
won't
to
ask you
marry
to
a
marry a
mafia
mafia
boss,
boss.
he said, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. But I'm asking you to stay with the man who found you in the dark. Naomi looked at the ring, then at the man who had stalked her, protected her, and ultimately set her free. She took the ring, but she didn't put it on. Instead, she took his hand. On one condition, she said. Anything. No more guards. If you want to know where I am, you come find me yourself. Sujin smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. The transition from the shadows of the club to the light of the upper echelons wasn't as seamless as Sujin had promised. While the city's elite whispered about the mystery woman on his arm, the staff at the Gilded Lily still remembered Noah. One evening, while Sujin was locked in a high-stakes negotiation, Naomi walked through the main floor of the club. She was dressed in a tailored suit, not a waiter's uniform but a woman's power suit that hummed with authority. She found the floor manager, a man who had once barked orders at her, looking pale as he realized who was approaching. I'm not here for a shift, Marcus, she said, her voice no longer dropped to a gravelly fake. It was clear, resonant, and entirely hers. I'm here to check the books for Sujin. She realized then that her time as Noah hadn't just been a period of hiding, it had been an apprenticeship. She knew the back exits, the short-poured bottles, and the faces of the regulars. She wasn't just Sujin's obsession, she was becoming his most trusted partner. When Sujin watched her from the mezzanine later that night, it wasn't the look of a predator watching prey. It was the look of a king watching his queen reclaim the board. True to his word, the visible guards disappeared. There were no more black sedans idling at the curb, no more men in earpieces trailing her through Central Park. But the stalker in Sujin hadn't vanished. It had simply evolved. Naomi noticed the subtle changes. A new security system in her favorite bookstore. The way the barista at her morning coffee shop seemed to know her order before she spoke, and how the shop had been renovated with bulletproof glass overnight. She confronted him that night in the penthouse. You're still doing it, the invisible wall. Sujin was at the piano, his long fingers playing a haunting, low melody. He didn't look up. I promised you wouldn't see the guards, Naomi. I never promised you wouldn't be safe. There is a difference between a cage and a shield. And what if I want to be vulnerable? What if I want to just exist without your shadow? He stopped playing. The silence was heavy, charged with that familiar alpha intensity. He stood and walked toward her, his presence filling the room. Then you chose the wrong man, because as long as I draw breath, the world will have to go through me to get to you. The tension of their new normal reached a boiling point during a weekend getaway to a private estate in the Hamptons. Away from the noise of the city, the air between them felt thin and electric. Naomi pushed him, testing the boundaries of his control, challenging his protective nature until the friction turned into fire. In the master's suite overlooking the Atlantic, the power struggle dissolved into raw, unfiltered passion. This was the third of their 4 encounters, a night where Naomi didn't just accept his dominance but claimed her own. The implicit heat of the room was stifling as Soo-jin's obsession manifested in every touch, every whispered word of devotion. He worshipped her not as a trophy, but as the only person who had ever dared to look at him and say no. In the quiet aftermath, as the waves crashed against the shore, Naomi realized that his obsession wasn't a weight, it was an anchor. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was drifting. A year had passed since the night the tray trembled in Noah's hands. Naomi sat at the obsidian desk in the penthouse, reviewing the expansion plans for their new international holdings. She was no longer a secret. She was the face of the business, the velvet glove over Soo-jin's iron fist. Bwwm had become a lead architect, his first major project being the redesign of the Gilded Lily. The club was no longer a place of hiding, but a landmark of their shared history. Soo-jin entered the room leaning against the doorframe. He didn't say a word, just watched her. He still had that habit, the silent, focused stare that had once terrified her. Now it just felt like home. "You're starring again," she said without looking up from the screen. "I'm observing my greatest investment," he replied, his voice a warm rasp. "I'm not an investment, Soo-jin. I'm a person." "You," he said, walking over and kissing the top of her head, "are the only person. Everyone else is just background noise." The New York skyline was a tapestry of light, but Naomi's focus was on the man beside her. There had been no violence, no blood spilled to keep her, just a relentless, overwhelming obsession that had reshaped both of their worlds. Naomi reached down, feeling the gold anklet still nestled against her skin. She had never asked him to take it off. "Do you ever miss him?" Soo-jin asked suddenly. "Who?" "Noah, the boy who was so afraid of me he couldn't even look me in the eye." Naomi smiled, leaning her head against Soo-jin's shoulder. Noah was a survivor. He did what he had to do so that Naomi could have everything she ever wanted. Soo-jin pulled her closer, his arm a familiar, protective weight around her waist. The alpha and his Noah were gone, replaced by 2 people who had found a dangerous, beautiful middle ground. "And do you have everything you want?" he whispered. Naomi looked out at the city, then up at the man who had stalked her, caught her, and loved her until she couldn't remember why she ever wanted to run. "Almost," she said, pulling him down for one last, lingering kiss as the curtain closed on their gilded deception. "I have you. The rest is just scenery." From the desperate streets of New York to the heights of a billionaire's penthouse, Naomi's journey from a hidden waiter to a mafia queen has been a whirlwind of secrets, obsession, and undeniable heat. Their story proves that sometimes, the very person you're running from is the only one who truly sees you. What was your favorite part of Naomi and Soo-jin's journey? Was it the high-stakes tension of the first encounter in the office? The heart-stopping moment Soo-jin appeared on the living room sofa? Or perhaps the way Naomi turned her disguise into power, proving she was never just a victim of circumstance? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear which of Soo-jin's alpha moments made your pulse race the most. Don't miss the next obsession. If you loved this stalker romance and want more stories featuring protective alphas, fierce heroines, and no violence, psychological tension, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.